What is a globalist? If you've been following this election at all, you've probably heard the words globalist and globalism thrown around a lot. Some of the people using it are nationalists or patriots. They see this idea as a threat to the sovereignty of their nation, whichever nation that happens to be. Others argue that the term globalism is just a scary catch-all word invented by Trump supporters or the alt-right, a word that means nothing at best and is racist code at worst. But who's right? The reality is that globalism means something very specific and very dangerous if you value democracy, individualism, or any of the values of Western civilization. Yet most people can't define it. So what is globalism, and why should you be as concerned about it as the rest of us? Political scientists would have you believe that globalism is harmless. They tell us that it means simply being a citizen of the world, which sounds nice if you're the kind of person who takes what you hear in a political seminar as gospel, but behind that contentless phrase are sinister implications. Thus, the more wonky defenders of globalism define it as being interconnected by removing cultural and legal barriers, or as the pooling of states' sovereignty into supranational organizations. And if you're scratching your head at what that means, then that should be your first warning sign. You see, with globalism, the devil is in the details, and the more sinister the implications of its vision, the more incomprehensible its defenders get in defining them. So in plain English, here is what globalism actually means. Globalism means treating every country in the world like an unruly toddler, with international bureaucrats filling the role of daycare instructor. Globalism means your vote doesn't count unless the wise men in Brussels or on Wall Street or in the UN building decide it's allowed to count. Globalism means any law your government passes is subject to invalidation by unelected hall monitors who would rather police the boundaries of free speech than the borders of actual countries. Globalism means unending war in the third world and unchecked immigration from the third world, all sponsored by unelected governments with as much respect for the people they govern as those in the third world. Unsurprisingly, this system has disastrous effects, which I will get into later in this video. Now, despite what you might think hearing that, globalists are not all right-wing or all left-wing. Both of these groups can want more centralized global planning for their own interests. But one thing they do have in common is globalists are almost universally either hated in their own countries or highly controversial at best. You don't need to take my word for it. Just listen to this list of famous globalists: George Soros, Henry Kissinger, Angela Merkel, Jean-Claude Juncker, Jeremy Corbyn, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, Justin Trudeau, and possibly the original globalist, the real OG himself, Woodrow Wilson. Not one of these people views citizenship in their own countries as sacred. And why should they? Along with their contempt for citizenship as a quaint anachronism, globalists almost always sneer down their nose at tradition, disdain national culture, laugh at religion, and generally despise the West while holding a creepy affection for the third world. They want open borders, cheap labor, and anti-nationalism to benefit their business and political visions, and are all too willing to shaft the little people to achieve it. To them, freedom means never having to say you're sorry for building your agenda and business on the backs of everyone else. They do this through garnering political power and creating large supranational government entities that push globalist agendas. You've probably heard of those too. You know, groups like the United Nations, the European Union, the IMF, World Bank, African Union, Arab League, UNIFOR, Mercosur, and many more. And despite the warm and fuzzy, we're all in this together talking points that these organizations use to justify their existence, even the most minor criticism exposes them as being united by a far darker purpose. That purpose? To help further the businesses, financial deals, political goals, and life situations of the elites who run them, with the people affected treated as distant, mocked afterthoughts. In short order, here are the goals of the globalists. They want to open up borders for private corporations through policies that weaken borders and trade agreements. This means that if you have a job that pays first world wages and employs you in first world working conditions, you are now obsolete. Because a sweatshop worker in India, or a slave in an African diamond mine, or a victim of trafficking from China can do your job cheaper, and damn their rights or yours. They want to get rid of the gold standard, so that the purchasing power of the dollar will be worth only as much as what the best conman at the biggest central bank says it is. They want to destroy national borders and allow terrorists to move in next door to you in the name of cultural enrichment and diversity. They want to sweep nationalism, nation-states, and national democracy under the rug. They want to leave local communities to pick up the tab for their agenda and shut out any local voices complaining about the cost. They want to use the false flag of diversity as cover to mold you into how their balance sheets and Econ 101 textbooks see you, as faceless, expendable consumers deprived of culture, identity, or thought. They want to hide behind the fig leaf of the free market while pushing corporate welfare, cronyism, and too big to fail. Because while every citizen of the world is equal, some are more equal than others. This is not a crazy conspiracy theory. This is real life. This is the worldview that has literally governed the world over half a century. To be sure, not all globalists are evil or have bad motives. Some are simply naive or else have read too much Immanuel Kant. These people genuinely believe, with Kant himself, that creating a centralized world government is a path to perpetual world peace. They see it as their duty to make up the small, elite group of managers for this brave new world. And if they happen to get filthy stinkin' rich in the process, well, duty and self-interest happily coincide. But some of us know this farce for what it is. And more people are waking up to realize these self-appointed emperors have no clothes. I implore you to join us. You know that this worldview acts in defiance of human nature, that it cannot work in a world of fallen, imperfect people who are easily corrupted by too much power. You know that the larger and more centralized governments cannot be held accountable, and have watched as many of these globalist organizations do no good for the world and simply serve their own selfish needs. Were the 800,000 people slaughtered in the Rwandan genocide better off because the UN was there to supervise their murder? The very UN that is dominated by dictators, Islamist theocrats, and other escapees from the ash heap of history? Are the Ethiopians better off for being crushed under the heel of guerrilla warlords who have been bought and paid for by globalist aid groups? Groups that fund wars, create social unrest, cheapen labor, disrupt entire economies, and tear apart nations and peoples for the sake of their selfish financial shell game? Are you better off for having everything from the price of your iPhone to the type of pillowcase you can buy micromanaged from the desks of interfering supranational bureaucrats? It's madness. As President Obama ironically and correctly said, we don't look to be ruled, particularly by faceless busybodies whose names and faces we cannot even recognize. We still hold to the classical liberal vision of a free people governed by public servants, rather than dictators who use and abuse us. We still cling to the idea that politicians will be accountable to us because they have to look us in the face and answer to us. Globalism, like the failed aspirants to one world government who made up the Soviet Union, can no longer sustain the myth that it is inevitable or benevolent. It is mired in scandal, plagued by lack of accountability, and confronted every day with more people willing to expose the destructive and frankly evil behavior of its adherents. That's why Brexit scares the globalists, because it is their Waterloo. Well, I say we keep forcing them back until, as with Napoleon, the world is extricated from their small, sad shadow. Thanks for watching. Don't miss my show Standoff by clicking here to become a member.